Anthony Hill's hand trembles as he stares at the rapidly spreading stain on Nova's azure skin. The experimental compound he just spilled glistens ominously in the dim light of the research station's lab. "Oh no," he whispers, heart racing. "What have I done?" The 28-year-old human scientist watches in horror as his Klingon roommate's body begins to twitch and convulse. Nova's eyes snap open, blazing with an intensity Anthony has never seen before. A primal growl escapes her throat. "Anthony," she rasps, her voice raw with newfound hunger. "What's happening to me?" The research station orbiting a distant planet suddenly feels claustrophobic. Anthony's mind races, grasping the gravity of the situation. He's just accidentally awakened a dormant biological process in Nova, a notoriously aggressive Klingon, triggering an uncontrollable mating urge. Alarms blare in Anthony's head. This unauthorized experiment could jeopardize humanity's standing in the Galactic Alliance. Earth's government assigned him to this interspecies post to prove humanity's worth. Now he's on the brink of causing a diplomatic incident. Nova lunges forward, pinning Anthony against the lab bench. Her breath comes in ragged gasps, her pupils dilated with desire. I need, she pants, unable to articulate the overwhelming biological imperative coursing through her veins. Anthony struggles to think clearly as Nova's powerful form presses against him. The situation is spiraling out of control. He needs to contain this before it spreads to other Klingons on the station. The implications hit him like a punch to the gut. This is no ordinary mating cycle. It's a long dormant Klingon phenomenon that occurs only once every 100 years. "Nova, listen to me," Anthony pleads, trying to keep his voice steady. "We need to get you isolated. This could trigger a chain reaction in other Klingons." Nova's grip tightens, her nails digging into Anthony's arms. The air crackles with tension, sexual and violent. Anthony feels his own body responding, a mix of fear and attraction coursing through him. "Too late," Nova growls, her face inches from his. "It's already starting." In the corridor outside, a commotion erupts. Angry Klingon voices rise above the usual hum of the station. Anthony's blood runs cold. The awakening is spreading. He's torn between scientific fascination and sheer panic. This accidental discovery could revolutionize interspecies biology or tear apart the fragile peace between humans and aliens on the station. Nova's lips crash against his, desperate and demanding. Anthony responds instinctively before forcing himself to pull away. He has to focus, find a solution. Fast. "Computer, initiate emergency lockdown protocol," Anthony gasped out. "Authorization, Hill Alpha 79. As blast doors slam shut throughout the station, Anthony realizes he's trapped himself in ground zero of an interstellar incident with an increasingly amorous Klingon, and no idea how to stop what he started. The fate of human-alien relations hangs in the balance, and it all began with one clumsy spill in a late-night lab session. The blast doors slammed shut with a resounding thud, sealing Anthony and Nova inside the research station's lab. Anthony's heart raced as he realized the full implications of his actions. He had just trapped himself with an increasingly unstable Klingon in the throes of an intense mating cycle. Nova's eyes blazed with a primal intensity as she advanced on Anthony again. He held up his hands, trying to maintain some distance between them. "Nova, we need to get you somewhere safe," he said, his voice strained. "Follow me to my quarters. We can figure this out there." With a Herculean effort, Anthony managed to guide Nova through the empty corridors to his personal living space. As soon as they entered, he activated the room's biocontainment protocols. "Computer, initiate Level 4 quarantine," he commanded. "Authorization, Hill Beta 31. A faint shimmer rippled across the room's entrance as the containment field engaged. Anthony let out a shaky breath, knowing they were now effectively cut off from the rest of the station. Nova paced the room like a caged animal, her skin glistening with an otherworldly sheen. Anthony couldn't help but notice the changes overtaking her body. Her azure complexion had taken on a flushed, almost iridescent quality. Heat radiated from her in palpable waves. I need, Nova growled, her words dissolving into guttural Klingon. Anthony approached the room's computer terminal, his fingers flying across the interface. Computer, access all available data on Klingon biology, specifically mating cycles. The computer chirped in response, and information began scrolling across the screen. Anthony's eyes widened as he read, the pieces falling into place. Pon farr, he muttered. A mating cycle that occurs once every 100 years. If left undrived, he trailed off, the implication sinking in. A crash behind him made Anthony whirl around. Nova had overturned a metal table, scattering its contents across the floor. Her Klingon strength was on full display as she began to tear apart the room, ripping cushions and smashing furniture. "Nova, stop!" Anthony shouted, but his words fell on deaf ears. Realizing he needed help, Anthony turned back to the terminal. Computer, establish a secure channel with Dr. Lirel Tisoni, Xenobiology Department. Moments later, the calm face of an Asari appeared on the screen. "Mr. Hill, this is highly irregular. What's the nature of your emergency?" Anthony quickly explained the situation, his words tumbling out in a rush. Dr. Tisoni's expression grew grave as she listened. "Your actions have put us all in a precarious position, Mr. Hill," she said. "Interfering with Klingon biology could have severe diplomatic consequences. However, given the circumstances, I'll do what I can to assist. We need to run some tests to determine the exact nature of Nova's condition." Under Dr. Tisoni's guidance, Anthony began a series of scans on Nova. The Klingon alternated between moments of cooperation and violent outbursts. During one calm period, Nova's eyes cleared, and she grabbed Anthony's arm. "Anthony," she said, her voice hoarse, "there's something you need to know. I'm not just a scientist. The Klingon Empire sent me here as a spy, to gather intelligence on human weaknesses." Anthony felt as if the floor had dropped out from under him. "What? Nova, why are you telling me this now?" "Because," she gasped, fighting against another wave of the mating urge, "you need to understand the stakes. If word of this gets out, it could destroy the alliance between our peoples." Before Anthony could process this revelation, Nova's lucidity faded, and she lunged at him again. He barely managed to dodge her grasp, putting the remains of a shattered chair between them. Dr. Tisoni's voice cut through the chaos. "Mr. Hill, the test results are in. The compound you spilled has accelerated and intensified Nova's natural mating cycle. I believe I can synthesize a hormone treatment to alleviate some symptoms, but it will take time." "Time we don't have," Anthony said, watching Nova warily as she paced the room. "Indeed," Dr. Tisoni agreed. "Mr. Hill, given the urgency of the situation, you may need to consider more immediate solutions to Nova's condition." Anthony's face flushed as he grasped the doctor's meaning. Before he could respond, alarms began blaring throughout the station. The containment field around his quarters flickered ominously. "Warning, containment field integrity at 60% and falling," the computer announced. A new voice crackled over the room's comm system. "This is Commander Sovic. Mr. Hill, we are detecting a containment breach in your quarters. Open this door immediately, or we will be forced to override your lockdown." Anthony's mind raced. The stern Vulcan security chief would undoubtedly report this incident, potentially triggering an interstellar diplomatic crisis. But if he didn't act soon, Nova's condition could worsen beyond the point of no return. As Nova let out another primal roar, tearing into the remains of Anthony's bed, he knew he had to make a decision. The fate of Nova, the station, and possibly human-Klingon relations hung in the balance, and it all rested on what Anthony chose to do next. His hand hovered over the door controls as Commander Sovic's voice rang out again, more insistent this time. Nova's eyes locked onto Anthony, a mixture of desperation and raw need evident in her gaze. The containment field flickered once more, a stark reminder of the dwindling time left to act. Anthony took a deep breath, steeling himself for whatever came next. He knew that his next move would change everything, for better or worse. With a silent prayer to whatever cosmic forces might be listening, he prepared to face the consequences of his decision. Anthony's hand trembled as he reached for the door controls. The weight of his decision pressed down on him, each second feeling like an eternity. Just as his fingers brushed the panel, A desperate idea flashed through his mind. "Computer, initiate emergency override sequence, Hill Omega 9, he shouted, his voice cracking with urgency. The room hummed as a secondary containment field snapped into place, reinforcing the existing barriers. Anthony exhaled sharply, knowing he had bought himself precious minutes, but at a cost. Alarms blared throughout the station, signaling a major security breach. "Warning! Station-wide alert activated," the computer announced dispassionately. Anthony's mind raced. He knew he had to act fast before the situation spiraled even further out of control. His eyes darted around the room, landing on the small lab setup in the corner of his quarters. "Nova, hold on," he muttered, more to himself than to the writhing Klingon. "I'm going to fix this." He dashed to the workstation, fingers flying across the interface as he pulled up Dr. Tisoni's preliminary data. With shaking hands, he began assembling the necessary components for a makeshift hormonal suppressant. Behind him, Nova let out a guttural roar. The restraints Anthony had improvised earlier groaned under the strain of her enhanced Klingon strength. With a final, massive effort, she tore free, shredding the bindings without effort. Anthony whirled around, a half-finished vial of suppressant in his hand. "Nova, please!" His words were cut short as Nova lunged at him, her eyes wild with primal need. They collided hard, Anthony's back slamming against the lab table. The impact sent equipment and chemicals flying, shattering against the floor in a cacophony of breaking glass and hissing liquids. A thick, pungent mist began to fill the room, the spilled chemicals reacting with the earlier compound. Anthony's nostrils flared as he inhaled the pheromone-laden air. His vision swam, and he felt a sudden intense heat coursing through his body. Nova pressed against him, her azure skin glistening with perspiration. Anthony found himself responding to her closeness, his scientific objectivity rapidly eroding under the influence of the potent chemical cocktail. "Nova," he gasped, his purpose weakening. "We can't—" But his protest died on his lips as Nova captured them with her own. The kiss was fierce, desperate, fueled by 100 years of pent-up Klingon passion. Anthony's arms wrapped around her, pulling her closer despite every logical part of his brain, screaming at him to stop. As their bodies intertwined, Anthony noticed something unexpected. Nova's erratic movements began to slow, her breathing becoming less labored. He glanced at the biomonitor on his wrist, eyes widening as he saw her vital signs beginning to stabilize. "Fascinating," he murmured against her neck, the scientist in him momentarily overriding his baser instincts. "It seems the physical contact is creating some kind of biofeedback loop in your Klingon physiology." Nova growled in response, clearly uninterested in his observations. She pulled him towards the bed, or what remained of it after her earlier rampage. Outside Anthony's quarters, Commander Sovik's voice crackled over the intercom, now tinged with genuine concern. "Mr. Hill, our scanners are detecting dangerous chemical levels in your quarters. We are initiating emergency breach protocols." The sound of cutting tools could be heard beyond the reinforced door. Anthony knew his time was running out. He looked at Nova, seeing a mixture of desperation and need in her eyes. "Computer," he called out, his voice hoarse. "Initiate privacy mode and restrict all incoming communications." As the computer acknowledged his command, Anthony made his choice. He surrendered to Nova's embrace, hoping that by seeing this through, he could stabilize her condition and prevent a station-wide catastrophe. What Anthony didn't realize was that their intimate encounter was triggering an unexpected chain reaction. Nova's body began producing a unique pheromone, its effects spreading beyond the confines of Anthony's quarters. Across the station, Klingon crew members suddenly found themselves overwhelmed by inexplicable urges. In the mess hall, 2 Klingon engineers who had been quietly sharing a meal suddenly launched into a full-blown brawl, overturning tables and sending other diners scrambling for cover. In the security office, Commander Sovik frowned as reports of Klingon aggression began flooding in from all sectors. He turned to his newest team member, the humanoid AI known as Zara 7. "Zara, I need you to bypass the security protocols on Mr. Hill's quarters," Sovik ordered, his Vulcan calm belying the urgency of the situation. "We need to understand what's happening in there." Zara 7's eyes glowed as she interfaced with the station's systems. Initiating hack now, Commander. Estimated time to completion, 3 minutes. As chaos began to spread throughout the station, Dr. Tusoni worked frantically in her lab, monitoring the escalating situation. She knew she had to act fast to contain the fallout. With a few quick commands, she opened a secure channel to Earth's ambassador to the station, Marcus Chen. The ambassador's face appeared on her screen, his expression grave. Dr. Tusoni, what's the meaning of this? I'm receiving reports of widespread unrest among the Klingon crew. Ambassador Chen, Tusoni began, her voice steady despite the gravity of the situation. We have a potential diplomatic incident unfolding. Mr. Hill's unauthorized research has triggered a rare Klingon mating cycle. If word of this gets out, the consequences for human-Klingon relations could be severe. Chen's face paled as he absorbed the implications. Understood, Doctor. I'm taking control of this situation now. With a few quick commands, Chen opened a channel to Commander Sovic. Commander, this is Ambassador Chen. Stand down immediately. I'm initiating a station-wide lockdown under the guise of a routine security drill. Sovic's eyebrow raised in a rare display of surprise. Ambassador, with all due respect, that's an order, Commander. Chen cut him off. We need to contain this situation before it escalates further. As the station's alert system announced the beginning of the security drill, Anthony and Nova remained oblivious to the chaos unfolding beyond their sealed quarters. Their intimate encounter continued, Nova's condition slowly stabilizing with each passing moment. But as the effects of the pheromone mist began to wear off, Anthony felt a creeping sense of clarity returning. The full weight of his actions started to sink in, along with the realization that resolving Nova's immediate crisis was just the beginning of his problems. As Nova drifted into an exhausted sleep beside him, Anthony stared at the ceiling, his mind racing. He had crossed lines he never thought he would, violated numerous protocols, and potentially jeopardized humanity's standing in the galactic community. And yet, as he glanced at Nova's now peaceful form, he couldn't bring himself to regret his decision entirely. Something had changed between them, something that went beyond the physical act they had just shared. Anthony knew that when Nova awoke, they would have to face the consequences of their actions together. But for now, in this brief moment of calm, he allowed himself to feel a glimmer of hope that they might find a way through this crisis. Little did he know that beyond the walls of his quarters, the station was a powder keg ready to explode, with the fate of human-Klingon relations hanging in the balance. Balance. The soft hum of the station's systems filled the silence as Anthony's eyes began to close, exhaustion finally overtaking him. A sudden jolt shook the room, startling both Anthony and Nova awake. The station's alarms blared to life, their piercing wail cutting through the air. Warning, environmental systems compromised. Initiating emergency protocols, the computer's voice announced, its usual calm tone tinged with urgency. Anthony scrambled to his feet, his mind still foggy from sleep and the lingering effects of the pheromones. He stumbled to the nearest console, fingers flying across the interface as he tried to make sense of the chaos unfolding around them. Nova, he called out, his voice hoarse. Are you all right? The Klingon woman rose from the bed, her movements far steadier than they had been hours before. I am functional, she replied, a hint of confusion in her voice. What is happening, Anthony? Before he could answer, the door to his quarters hissed open. Commander Sovic stood in the doorway, his usually stoic Vulcan features contorted in an uncharacteristic display of emotion. Behind him, the corridor was filled with the sounds of shouting and running feet. Mr. Hill, Sovic began, his voice strained. You and Nova must come with me immediately. The situation has escalated beyond our control. As they hurried through the corridors, Anthony's eyes widened at the scene unfolding around them. Crew members of various species were engaged in heated arguments, some on the verge of physical altercations. Others seemed to be in the throes of passion, oblivious to their surroundings. The pheromones, Anthony muttered, realization dawning. They've spread throughout the station. Sovic nodded curtly. Dr. Tusoni's lab, now. They burst into the lab to find Dr. Tusoni hunched over a console, her blue skin pale with exhaustion. She looked up as they entered, relief evident in her eyes. Anthony, Nova, "Thank the goddess you're here," she said, gesturing for them to approach. "The pheromones you two produced during your encounter have mutated. They're affecting everyone on the station, adapting to each species' biology." Anthony's scientific curiosity momentarily overrode his concern. "Fascinating. The implications for interspecies biochemistry are—" "Focus, Mr. Hill," Sovic interrupted, his voice tight. "We need a solution, not an academic discussion." Dr. Tassoni nodded. "He's right. If we don't contain this soon, we could be looking at a station-wide mating frenzy. The genetic implications alone are staggering." Nova, who had been quiet until now, spoke up. "What do you need from us, Doctor?" Tassoni's eyes darted between Anthony and Nova. "Your combined DNA might be the key to neutralizing the pheromone effect. But to synthesize an antidote, we'd need to, well, re-trigger Nova's Ponfar under controlled conditions." Anthony's face flushed. "You mean we'd have to—" "Yes," Tassoni cut him off. "And quickly. Ambassador Chen has already initiated a station-wide lockdown, but it's only a matter of time before—" The lab doors slid open, revealing Ambassador Chen himself. His usually impeccable suit was disheveled, and a thin sheen of sweat covered his brow. "Doctor, we're out of time," Chen announced, his voice tight with hardly restrained panic. "Earth's government is demanding immediate containment. They're talking about quarantine, maybe even—" He trailed off, unwilling to voice the worst-case scenario. Sovic's communicator chirped. "Commander," Zara 7's synthetic voice came through. "I've detected an approaching Klingon battlecruiser. ETA? 2 hours." The room fell silent as the gravity of the situation sank in. Anthony looked at Nova, seeing his own mix of fear and willpower reflected in her eyes. "We'll do it," Anthony said firmly. "Whatever it takes to fix this." Nova nodded, reaching out to grasp his hand. Together. Chen's communicator beeped. He listened for a moment, his face growing pale. "They've authorized use of the experimental stasis field generator," he announced. "It'll freeze all biological processes on the station, buying us time, but if we're caught in it before synthesizing the antidote, everyone on this station will be trapped in stasis indefinitely," Tassoni finished grimly. Sovic straightened, his Vulcan control reasserting itself. "Then we must act now. Dr. Tassoni, prepare your lab. Mr. Hill, Nova, are you ready?" Anthony took a deep breath, squeezing Nova's hand. "As we'll ever be." As they moved to follow Tassoni deeper into the lab, the station shuddered. Through the viewport, Anthony could see the shimmering edge of the stasis field beginning to envelop the outer sections of the station. "The field is active," Chen reported, his voice tight. "We have less than an hour before it reaches this section." Anthony and Nova exchanged a look, volumes passing between them in that silent moment. They had moved beyond mere physical attraction, forging a connection that transcended species barriers. Now that connection would be put to the ultimate test. As Tassoni prepared the necessary equipment, Anthony pulled Nova close. "Whatever happens," he whispered, "I want you to know." Nova pressed a finger to his lips, silencing him. "I know," she said softly. "Me too." With a shared nod of drive, they stepped into the isolation chamber. As the door sealed behind them, Anthony couldn't help but think that the fate of not just the station, but potentially the entire balance of power in the galaxy, rested on what happened in the next hour. The chamber hummed to life around them, instruments beginning to record every aspect of their biology. Outside, Tassoni and her team worked feverishly to prepare for the synthesis of the antidote. Anthony took Nova's hands in his, their eyes locked. "Ready?" he asked. Nova's response was to pull him into a fierce kiss, reigniting the spark of her Ponfar. As they came together once more, the station continued its descent into chaos around them, the stasis field creeping ever closer, and a Klingon battlecruiser bearing down on them from the depths of space. In that moment, as Anthony and Nova's bodies and minds merged, they both knew that their actions in the next few minutes would shape the future of human-alien relations for generations to come. The only question was whether they would be awake to see it, or frozen in stasis with the rest of the station's inhabitants. As the isolation chamber filled with the glow of their combined biosignatures, The race against time truly began. The isolation chamber pulsed with a soft, otherworldly glow as Anthony and Nova's bodies intertwined, their connection transcending the physical realm. Outside, Dr. Tassoni and her team worked feverishly, monitoring every fluctuation in their biosignatures. "It's working," Tassoni exclaimed, her eyes fixed on the rapidly changing data streams. "The unique combination of their DNA is producing a neutralizing agent. We just need a few more minutes to synthesize it into a viable antidote." Commander Sovik's voice crackled over the intercom, tension evident even through his Vulcan control. "Doctor, the stasis field has reached Deck 7. We have less than 5 minutes before it engulfs the medical bay." Inside the chamber, Anthony and Nova were lost in their own world, oblivious to the frantic activity around them. Their minds merged, forming a telepathic bond that neither had experienced before. Through this connection, they shared not just physical sensation, but thoughts, memories, and emotions. As their climax approached, the instruments surrounding them went into overdrive, recording the unique biochemical reactions taking place. Tassoni's fingers flew across her console, isolating the key compounds needed for the antidote. "We've got it!" she shouted triumphantly, just as the chamber's door slid open with a hiss. Anthony and Nova separated, panting heavily. Their eyes met, a silent understanding passing between them. Without a word, they quickly dressed and rushed to Tassoni's side. "The antidote," Anthony gasped, reaching for the hypospray Tassoni held out. "Is it ready?" Tassoni nodded, her expression grim. "Yes, but we don't have time to test it. The stasis field is—" A low rumble cut her off as the lights flickered. The stasis field had reached the outer edges of the medical bay. "No time," Nova growled, snatching the hypospray from Anthony's hand. In one fluid motion, she pressed it against his neck and activated it, then did the same to herself. Anthony opened his mouth to protest, but his words died in his throat as a shimmering wave of energy swept through the room. In an instant, everyone around them froze in place. Tassoni with her mouth half open, Sovik reaching for his communicator, the lab technicians in various states of motion. Only Anthony and Nova remained conscious, their bodies rigid but their minds still active. Through their newfound telepathic link, they communicated. It worked, Anthony thought, relief flooding through him. "We're still aware." "Yes," Nova's mental voice replied, tinged with concern. "But we cannot move. What now?" Before Anthony could respond, a new sensation washed over them. The stasis field seemed to press in on all sides, threatening to overwhelm their consciousness. They fought against it, clinging to awareness as the hours ticked by. Suddenly, a commotion broke through their mental haze. The sound of heavy boots echoed through the station's corridors, accompanied by guttural voices speaking Klingon. "The battlecruiser," Nova realized. "They've boarded the station." Anthony's mind raced. "We need to break free. Warn them about the stasis field." They focused their combined willpower on moving, even slightly. At first, nothing happened. But slowly, agonizingly, Anthony felt his fingertips begin to twitch. The Klingon voices grew louder. A towering figure appeared in the doorway, Kavag, the battlecruiser's commander. His eyes scanned the frozen scene before settling on Anthony and Nova, still locked in an embrace. Kivag's face contorted with rage. "Hute!" he spat. "These humans dare to violate our women? This will mean war." "No!" Nova's mental voice cried out. "We must stop him before he—" Her thought was cut short as Kivag stormed out, barking orders to his crew. Through their telepathic link, Anthony and Nova redoubled their efforts to break free from the stasis field's grip. Slowly, painfully, they began to regain control of their bodies. Muscles screamed in protest as they forced themselves to move. By the time they managed to take their first stumbling steps, the Klingon boarding party had already moved on, leaving them alone in the medical bay. "We need to revive the others," Anthony gasped, his voice hoarse from disuse. He grabbed the hypospray containing the antidote and quickly administered it to Tassoni and Sovik. As the two began to stir, alarms suddenly blared throughout the station. A computerized voice announced, "Warning, stasis field generator? Overload detected. Catastrophic failure imminent." Anthony's eyes widened in horror. The antidote, he realized. It's reacting with the stasis field energy. Nova grabbed his arm, her grip tight with urgency. We must act quickly. The explosion could destroy not only this station, but the Klingon ship as well. As T'Soni and Sovic regained full consciousness, Anthony quickly explained the situation. We need to find a way to safely dissipate the energy before it's too late, he concluded. Sovic's eyebrow rose fractionally. A logical assessment. However, we must also address the Klingon incursion. If they deactivate the stasis field generator without understanding the situation, it could accelerate the overload. Agreed, T'Soni said, already moving to a nearby console. I'll try to stabilize the generator remotely. Anthony, Nova, you two need to stop the Klingons and explain what's happening. Your unique connection might be the key to convincing them. Anthony nodded, turning to Nova. Their eyes met, and in that moment, they didn't need words or even their telepathic link to understand each other. Together, they raced out of the medical bay, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. As they sprinted through the corridors, the station shuddered ominously. The stasis field flickered, allowing more crew members to slowly awaken. Anthony and Nova paused only long enough to administer the antidote to key personnel, instructing them to do the same for others. They rounded a corner and came face to face with Kava and his boarding party. The Klingon commander's eyes narrowed as he raised his disruptor. "Stop!" Anthony shouted, raising his hands. "You don't understand. The entire station is in danger. Your ship too. We need to work together or we'll all die here." Kava hesitated, his finger on the trigger. Nova stepped forward, her voice steady as she addressed him in Klingon. "Ho-Di, hear us out. What you see here is not what you think. We stand on the brink of a scientific breakthrough that could benefit both our peoples, if we survive long enough to study it." The Klingon commander's eyes darted between them, suspicion warring with curiosity on his face. Another violent tremor shook the station, making his decision for him. "Speak quickly, human," Kava growled. "What is happening here?" As Anthony launched into a rapid explanation of the pheromone incident, the stasis field, and the impending overload, Nova's mind reached out to his. Their thoughts intertwined, sharing information and formulating a plan even as Anthony spoke. They could only hope it would be enough to prevent disaster and forge a new understanding between their people. The fate of the station, and perhaps the future of human-Klingon relations, hung in the balance. Balance. The fate of the station, and perhaps the future of human-Klingon relations, hung in the balance. As if on cue, another violent tremor shook the station, nearly knocking them off their feet. Kava's eyes widened as he processed Anthony's words, the gravity of the situation finally sinking in. "You speak of pheromones and stasis fields," the Klingon commander growled, "but what of this impending explosion?" Before Anthony could respond, Nova interjected, her voice steady despite the chaos around them. "The antidote we created is reacting with the stasis field energy. It's causing a dangerous buildup of volatile particles throughout the station." Anthony's mind raced, analyzing the problem from every angle. Suddenly, an idea struck him. "The deflector dish," he blurted out. "We could use it to emit a focused beam of tachyon particles. It might neutralize the reactive elements." Kavag's brow furrowed. "And how do you propose to accomplish this, human?" "We'll need to modify the deflector dish," Anthony explained, his words tumbling out rapidly. "It won't be easy, but with your crew's help, we might have a chance." The Klingon commander hesitated for a moment before nodding curtly. "Very well, but know this. If you're lying, I'll personally ensure your death is slow and painful." With Kava's reluctant agreement, they sprang into action. Nova, her Klingon strength enhanced by the pheromone incident, took charge of the physical modifications to the deflector dish. Anthony coordinated with the engineering team, his fingers flying over consoles as he recalibrated the station's systems. As they worked, the station's structure groaned under the increasing strain. Sections of the hull began to buckle, and emergency force fields flickered to life, containing the spreading hull breaches. "We're losing structural integrity in sections 12 through 15, a frantic voice called out over the comms. Anthony gritted his teeth, pushing aside the rising panic. "Reroute power from non-essential systems. We need every ounce of energy for this to work." Through their telepathic link, Nova sensed Anthony's growing anxiety. "We can do this," she projected, her mental voice a soothing balm to his frayed nerves. Together. As they raced against time, Ambassador Chen and Kavag set aside their differences, working in tandem to coordinate evacuation efforts. They organized the station's occupants into groups, prioritizing the most vulnerable species. "Commander," Kaveh barked into his communicator, "begin transporting small groups to our ship. Prioritize children and the injured." Chen nodded approvingly. "Thank you, Commander. Your assistance is appreciated." In the medical bay, Dr. Tassoni hunched over her console, her eyes widening as she analyzed the latest data. "By the goddess," she muttered. "This can't be right." She double-checked her readings, but the results remained the same. The pheromone antidote mixture had begun altering the DNA of affected crew members. Traces of a hybrid human-Klingon genetic sequence were spreading throughout the population. Tassoni's fingers flew over her console, sending an urgent message to Anthony and Nova. "We have a new complication," she reported. "The genetic changes. They're accelerating. We don't know what the long-term effects might be." Anthony received the message just as he and Nova finished the final modifications to the deflector dish. He met Nova's eyes, a silent understanding passing between them. Whatever the consequences, they had to act now. "Activating the tachyon beam," Anthony announced, his hand hovering over the control panel. Nova placed her hand over his. "Together," she said aloud, her voice steady. They pressed the button in unison. For a moment, nothing happened. Then a brilliant blue beam erupted from the deflector dish, cutting through the chaos like a blade of pure energy. The effect was immediate and violent. A massive power surge ripped through the station, overloading systems and temporarily disabling artificial gravity and life support. Anthony and Nova found themselves suddenly weightless, surrounded by swirling debris in the now dark control room. Using their newfound telepathic bond, they coordinated their movements in the zero-gravity environment. "The backup systems," Anthony thought urgently. "We need to reinitialize the core." Nova understood instantly. Together, they pushed off from opposite walls, propelling themselves towards the nearest control panel. Their fingers intertwined as they worked in perfect synchronization, manually restarting the station's vital systems. As life support sputtered back to life and gravity slowly reasserted itself, they turned their attention to the main view screen. The tachyon beam pulsed steadily, its energy spreading throughout the station. Slowly, almost imperceptibly at first, the volatile particle reaction began to stabilize. A cheer went up from the assembled crew as sensors confirmed the immediate danger had passed. However, their relief was short-lived. The immense energy discharge had taken its toll on the station's infrastructure. Damage reports flooded in from all sectors, with the power core taking the brunt of the impact. "We're operating on emergency backup systems only," a technician reported grimly. "Main power is offline, and we don't have the resources to bring it back up." Kavag, who had been observing the humans' efforts with grudging respect, stepped forward. "Perhaps," he growled, "it is time for Klingons to show humans how real warriors handle a crisis." He tapped his communicator, barking orders in rapid-fire Klingon. Moments later, transporter beams shimmered throughout the control room as Klingon engineers materialized, carrying advanced power cells and repair equipment. As the Klingons set to work, Anthony and Nova shared a look of cautious optimism. They had averted one disaster, but the challenges were a long way to go. The genetic changes spreading through the station's population, the damaged infrastructure, and the delicate political situation all loomed large. Yet, as they watched humans and Klingons working side by side to save the station, a spark of hope ignited in their hearts. Perhaps, just perhaps, this crisis could be the catalyst for a new era of cooperation between their peoples. With renewed drive, Anthony and Nova turned their attention to the next pressing issue: understanding and managing the unexpected genetic changes affecting the station's inhabitants. As they began to analyze Dr. Tassoni's data, they knew that their actions in the coming hours would have far-reaching consequences. As they began analyzing Dr. Tassoni's data, alarms blared throughout the station once more. This time, it wasn't an internal threat, but an external one. "Incoming transmission," a technician called out. It's a Klingon war fleet." Anthony and Nova exchanged a look of commitment. They had overcome one crisis only to face another, potentially more devastating one. Without hesitation, they sprang into action, their newly forged telepathic link allowing them to coordinate their efforts seamlessly. "Ambassador Chen," Anthony called out, "we need to open diplomatic channels immediately. Kavag, your insight into Klingon tactics could be crucial." As Chen nodded and moved to the communications console, Kavag stepped forward, his eyes narrowing as he studied the tactical display. "This is no mere scouting party," he growled. "This is a full invasion force, led by General Koth himself." Nova's mind raced, formulating strategies and discarding them just as quickly. "We need to buy time," she said, her voice steady despite the gravity of the situation. "Anthony, what about the deflector dish? Could we modify it again?" Anthony's eyes lit up. "An electromagnetic pulse," he said, snapping his fingers. "If we can generate a strong enough EMP, we might be able to disable their ships without causing casualties." As they discussed the plan, the station shuddered under the first volley of Klingon weapons fire. The newly enhanced crew members, their hybrid DNA granting them increased strength and cognitive abilities, moved with startling efficiency to reinforce shields and return fire. Nova turned to Kava. "We need your help," she said, switching to Klingon. "Your knowledge of Klingon ship vulnerabilities could mean the difference between survival and annihilation." Kava hesitated, torn between his loyalty to the Empire and his grudging respect for the station's crew. Finally, he nodded. "I will assist you," he said gruffly, "but know this. If we survive, I will face the consequences of my actions with honor." As Kava began transmitting detailed information about the Klingon fleet's weaknesses, Anthony coordinated with the engineering team to modify the deflector dish. The hybrid crew worked with unprecedented speed and precision, their enhanced abilities allowing them to make complex calculations and adjustments on the fly. Meanwhile, Ambassador Chen's attempts at diplomacy were met with stony silence from General Koth. The Klingon purist faction saw the hybrid crew as an abomination, a threat to their genetic lineage that needed to be eradicated. "We're out of time," Nova announced as another barrage rocked the station. "Anthony, is the EMP ready?" Anthony's fingers flew over the control panel. "As ready as it'll ever be," he replied. "But we'll only get one shot at this. If it fails—" Nova placed her hand on his shoulder. "It won't fail," she said firmly. "Activate it now." Anthony took a deep breath and pressed the activation sequence. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, a massive pulse of electromagnetic energy erupted from the station's deflector dish, expanding rapidly towards the Klingon fleet. The effect was immediate and dramatic. As the pulse washed over the Klingon vessels, their systems flickered and died. Weapons went offline, shields collapsed, and engines sputtered to a halt. The once mighty war fleet hung motionless in space, temporarily helpless. Nova saw their opportunity and seized it. "Prepare a boarding party," she ordered, her voice ringing with authority. "We're going after General Koth himself." As Nova led a team of hybrid warriors on a daring spacewalk towards Koth's flagship, Anthony worked feverishly with Dr. Tusoni to compile visual evidence of the hybrid crew's capabilities. They needed to show the Klingons that this new species wasn't a threat, but a potential asset. Nova's team fought their way through the disabled Klingon ship with ruthless efficiency. Their enhanced strength and agility, combined with their human ingenuity, made them a force to be reckoned with. Klingon warriors fell before them, stunned by their prowess and the perfect fusion of human and Klingon traits they displayed. Finally, they reached the bridge. General Koth stood there, his face a mask of fury and disbelief. Nova stepped forward, her eyes locked on the Klingon leader. "General Koth," she said in flawless Klingon, "I challenge you to honorable combat. Let us settle this as warriors." Koth's eyes narrowed, but a grudging respect flickered in their depths. He nodded once, drawing his bat'leth. "So be it, hybrid," he growled. "Let us see if you are worthy of the Klingon blood that runs through your veins." As Nova and Koth began their fierce duel on the bridge of the flagship, Anthony's voice came over the station's communication system, broadcasting to every ship in the Klingon fleet. "Attention, Klingon warriors," he said, his voice steady and clear. "What you are about to see may challenge everything you believe about genetic purity and the future of your people. The video feed showed hybrid crew members performing feats of strength, agility, and intellect that surpassed both human and Klingon norms. It showcased their unwavering sense of honor, their tactical brilliance, and their fierce loyalty. On the flagship's bridge, Nova and Koth's battle reached its climax. Their bat'leths clashed in a fury of sparks, each combatant pushing themselves to their limits. Nova's human agility combined with her Klingon strength allowed her to match Koth blow for blow. With a final, decisive move, Nova disarmed Koth, sending his bat'leth clattering to the floor. She stood over him, her own weapon poised at his throat. "Yield," she said, her voice firm but not unkind. Koth looked up at her, his eyes wide with a mixture of shock and dawning realization. "You fight with the strength of a Klingon," he said slowly, "but with a grace I have never seen before. Perhaps, we have been too hasty in our judgment." As Koth yielded, Kvog's voice rang out across the fleet's communication channels. "My fellow Klingons," he began, his voice filled with passion and conviction. "We stand at a crossroads. Before us lies an opportunity not to dilute our strength, but to enhance it. These hybrids are not our enemies. They are the key to our future greatness." His words, combined with the evidence of the hybrid's abilities and Nova's victory over Koth, began to sway the opinions of the Klingon commanders. The battle came to a halt as both sides entered into tense negotiations. Anthony and Nova found themselves at the center of these discussions, arguing passionately for the potential benefits of controlled genetic hybridization. They presented it not as a threat to Klingon purity, but as a path to creating a stronger, more adaptable empire. As the negotiations progressed, the station's long-range sensors detected new arrivals. Ships from various species across the galaxy were beginning to appear, drawn by the news of this unprecedented genetic breakthrough. Anthony and Nova shared a look of apprehension. They had averted one crisis, but it was clear that their actions had set in motion events that would have far-reaching consequences throughout the galaxy. As representatives from numerous worlds began to request permission to dock, they knew that their challenges were a long way to go. The station, once a simple research outpost, now stood at the center of a potential interstellar crisis. Anthony and Nova, their bond stronger than ever, prepared themselves for the diplomatic and scientific challenges that lay ahead. They knew that their next actions would shape not only their own fate, but potentially the future of all species in the galaxy. As they watched the first of the alien ships begin its docking procedure, Anthony turned to Nova. "Ready for the next round?" he asked, a wry smile on his face. Nova nodded, her eyes gleaming with purpose. "Always," she replied. "Whatever comes next, we'll face it together." With that, they turned to greet the first of what promised to be many new arrivals, acutely aware that every decision they made from this point on could alter the course of galactic history. As the first alien ship completed its docking procedure, Anthony and Nova exchanged a determined glance. They had weathered one storm, but the true test of their leadership was just beginning. Over the following months, the station transformed from a simple research outpost into a bustling hub of interspecies activity. The once quiet corridors now echoed with a cacophony of alien languages and the constant hum of scientific equipment. Anthony and Nova found themselves at the center of it all, their days consumed by diplomatic meetings, scientific briefings, and the delicate task of maintaining peace among the diverse group of visitors. Their bond deepened as they navigated this new reality together. Their telepathic link, once a source of confusion, became an invaluable tool in coordinating their efforts. In quiet moments between meetings, they would often communicate without words, sharing thoughts and feelings with a simple touch or glance. One morning, as they prepared for yet another round of negotiations, their shared consciousness buzzed with an urgent message from Dr. Tissoni. The xenobiologist's face appeared on the nearest view screen, her expression a mix of excitement and concern. "Anthony, Nova, I've made a breakthrough," she said, her words tumbling out in a rush. "The hybrid DNA, it's not stable long-term. The enhanced abilities will begin to fade within a generation unless reinforced by regular doses of the original compound." The news hit them like a physical blow. Anthony's mind raced with the implications, while Nova's Klingon instincts screamed at the potential threat to their newfound strength. "How certain are you?" Anthony asked, his voice steady despite the turmoil in his thoughts. "I've run the simulations multiple times," Tassoni replied. "The results are conclusive." As they digested this information, alarms began to blare throughout the station. The news had leaked, spreading through the diverse population like wildfire. On the security feeds, they watched as arguments broke out among different species, some demanding immediate access to the compound, others calling for its destruction. Kvog's voice crackled over the comm system. "The Empire will not stand idly by while others seek to claim this power for themselves," he growled. "We demand control of the compound's production and distribution." Anthony and Nova shared a look of understanding. They knew what needed to be done. "We need to destroy the remaining samples," Nova said, her voice low and intense, "and erase the formula from the database." Anthony nodded, his eyebrows furrowed. It's the only way to prevent an arms race. They moved swiftly through the station, their enhanced abilities allowing them to outpace the chaos erupting around them. As they reached the main laboratory, they found Ambassador Chen waiting for them, flanked by a coalition of leaders from various species. "We can't allow you to destroy humanity's greatest discovery," Chen said, his usually calm demeanor replaced by fierce grit. Nova stepped forward, her voice resonating with authority. "This isn't just about humanity anymore. The consequences of this compound affect all of us." As she spoke, a wave of dizziness washed over her. Her skin flushed and her heart rate spiked. Anthony felt the change through their link and realized with a jolt of fear that Nova's Ponfar symptoms were resurfacing, triggered by the intense stress of the situation. As Nova struggled to maintain control, Anthony's mind raced. He thought back to everything they had experienced since that fateful day when the compound was first released. The enhanced abilities were impressive, certainly, but they weren't what truly mattered. It was the connections they had forged, the understanding they had gained of each other's cultures and strengths. In that moment of clarity, Anthony realized the true potential of their discovery. He reached out, taking Nova's hand in his own, and opened his mind fully to their shared consciousness. Together, they sifted through their combined knowledge and experiences, formulating a plan that could change the course of galactic history. Anthony turned to the assembled leaders, his eyes bright with purpose. "We don't need the compound," he said, his voice ringing with conviction. "We can achieve the same results through natural means, specialized diet, targeted exercises, meditation techniques, and we can do it without the risks of genetic manipulation." Nova, drawing strength from their connection, continued the thought. "We propose a new path forward, one of cooperation and mutual growth, where we learn from each other's strengths instead of trying to artificially replicate them." Their words hung in the air, met with a mix of skepticism and cautious hope. As the leaders debated among themselves, Nova's condition worsened. She gripped Anthony's hand tighter, her body trembling with the effort of maintaining control. Anthony, seeing her struggle, made a decision. In full view of the gathered representatives, he turned to Nova, his actions speaking louder than any words could. He supported her, his touch gentle but firm, helping her through the intense experience of Ponfar with compassion and understanding. The assembled leaders fell silent, watching this display of interspecies support and intimacy. It was a powerful symbol, a living embodiment of the cooperation Anthony and Nova proposed. As the Ponfar subsided, leaving Nova breathless but stable, the mood in the room had shifted. Even the most skeptical among them could not deny the power of what they had witnessed. Kvog, his expression softened from its usual scowl, was the first to speak. "Perhaps," he said, his voice gruff but thoughtful, "there is wisdom in your words. The Empire, we could benefit from such an exchange of knowledge." One by one, the other leaders voiced their agreement. They would give Anthony and Nova's proposal a chance. With the decision made, Anthony and Nova oversaw the controlled destruction of the remaining compound and the deletion of its formula from the station's database. In its place, they began to lay the groundwork for what would become the Interspecies Advancement Initiative. As they worked, both knew that this was just the beginning. The challenges ahead would be numerous and complex, but for the first time since this journey began, they felt truly prepared to face them. Together, they turned their gaze to the stars, ready to guide the galaxy into a new era of cooperation and understanding.
If you finish this story, please subscribe and like the video. Then leave a comment that says, "I liked the story," and I will heart every single one of them. It really helps me. Thank you for your time.